Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to subscribe to it, like it, and share it with everyone you know. And if you can leave a big fat review, that would be awesome, too. Also, check out Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for regular updates on what's coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram of Chicopee. Visit Metro's state-of-the-art dealership right next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or visit metrojeep.com and drive home in your new Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast. Resistance is useless.
Folks, if I walked out of here today and got hit by a bus, I could die a very happy fella. Why? Because I will have had the outrageously good fortune of speaking to every former member of my all-time favorite band, XTC. That includes Andy Partridge, Colin Moulding, Dave Gregory, Barry Andrews, and now former XTC drummer Terry Chambers. Who the hell gets to do that kind of thing? Well, it turns out a lot of people have, because every one of these guys has been totally gracious. But I've also spoken to people like Hugh Padgham, who engineered and produced some of XTC's greatest albums. I've also spoken to guys like guitar legend Mike Keneally, Robin Hitchcock, Thomas Walsh from Pugwash, and Steve Conte from the New York Dolls, who have all collaborated with Andy Partridge since the release of the final XTC album 24 years ago. And by speaking to Terry Chambers, I have now completed the entire XTC circle, leaving me with no other choice but to wallow in the excitement for virtually the remainder of my life. From 1972 until 1982, Terry Chambers was the band's original drummer. Terry would not only play on the band's first 6 albums, his playing, along with some crafty engineering on albums like Drums and Wires, Black Sea, and English Settlement, became one of the most furiously copied drum sounds of the entire 1980s. More than that, any drummer will tell you that Terry was an exceptionally skilled drummer whose drum parts were incredibly inventive and very hard to duplicate, especially live, where the band endured a punishing road schedule, which they shared with bands like The Police and the Talking Heads. In 1982, Terry left XTC following Andy Partridge's decision to walk away from live performances. Soon after that, Terry would locate himself to Australia, where he lived for many, many years. And in 2016, Terry would move back to the UK, and the following year, he would record an excellent EP with former XTC bandmate Colin Moulding under the name TC and I. But Terry didn't stop there. Soon after the TCI project was complete, Terry formed XTC. That's EXTC, where he performed XTC's music live for the first time in 4 decades with full cooperation from his former XTC bandmates. Today, Terry's band includes Steve Hampton, who had played with Joe Jackson and the Vapors and Dead Crow Road. They're joined with former Dead Crow Road bass player Terry Lyons. Together, they're not only playing XTC songs from those first 6 records, they're also playing songs from the band's last 6 records as well, songs that have never been played live. Terry's XTC are coming back to the States this month, including shows at the Space Ballroom in Hamden, Connecticut on April 25th and at the City Winery in Boston on April 30th. This is my conversation with former XTC drummer Terry Chambers from XTC on Baxie's Musical Podcast. Hey, there we go. That seems better. How you doing?
I'm going well, thanks.
Well, I'm glad we had a chance to do this a second time.
Yeah.
I think you'll be stunned by how familiar these questions may be to you. I'm so excited to have you. I have to tell you, not just because I'm a fan, but now I have now talked to every member of XTC. So I feel like I've completed this, this big giant accomplishment in my life. So it's great to have you. Even Barry Andrews said, "Oh, you got to talk to Terry. He's the funnest one of the bunch." So you got Barry Andrews' stamp of approval.
Well, I'll have to buy him a beer for that alone.
As I said the other day, I've been a fan for an awful long time, since 84, 85, and I never got the chance to see XTC live, which was somewhat of a pretty big regret, and to know that I had the chance to see your band play these songs live for, in some cases, the first time in 4 decades is it's just amazing to me. Some of these songs have never been played live at all. What's been the reaction to fans as they're hearing XTC play this music?
Well, regarding the USA, this will be our fourth tour, and the reaction has been overwhelming, really, especially after all this time. I mean, we have reduced grown men to tears. Whether 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 that's in a good sense or not, that depends. But seriously, though, we've even been playing to people that weren't even born when the band actually finished. So it's a quite surreal experience, to be honest. It's like a born again experience.
I would imagine that's true. I mean, the band itself has not functioned in about 24 years with any kind of regularity, and it's been off the road for the last 44. But it's also a band whose reputation has grown significantly as the years have gone by. I mean, people are citing XTC as a major influence, and like you say, in some cases, bands that weren't alive, back in 1982 when it came off the road. When I watch videos and of live performances, I mean, this was an unusually tight band for the time, especially considering you guys came into it kind of an umbrella of punk, which I mean it's not, but I mean most punk bands did not play with the same kind of talent and tightness that XTC certainly had back then.
Yeah, that's right. I think that the fact that the band has been absent for such a long time has made the heart rather more fonder, perhaps, But going on to your question about actually sort of, I guess, being signed up in the whirlwind that was punk at the time, we were never really part of that. And I think in the UK especially, we were not received particularly well in some of those venues where they wanted the 1, 2, 3, 4 Ramones, Sex Pistols type of punk band, and we were somewhere slightly off center from that. Likewise with bands like the Stranglers, they were another band there that they were sort of loosely connected with it, but you just sort of felt that there was something beyond just the routine punk thing, you know.
They were also older too. I mean, the Stranglers were a little bit older.
That's right. I guess they were sort of like at the tail end of the hard rock thing, I guess. I mean, there were several bands like that. I mean, a band that ended up going to the United States called the Babies springs to mind to me.
Yeah.
I think they developed in the UK, for example, sort of later on when there was a transition between the old style rock stuff, and then suddenly this punk thing came along, and they found themselves, as quite a few bands did, in this gap. And I think they sort of absconded over to the United States there in order to continue their career. And I've got a lot of time for them, to be honest.
It's funny because a while back I talked to Dave Gregory. We talked about whether he felt he could physically play like certain songs, at his age. Could he still play Scissor Man at his age? And he says, "Oh hell, I wouldn't even attempt that." Obviously, everyone's gotten a little bit older. Are there specific songs that have gotten harder for you to play?
Yeah, it's interesting that you should mention that song, because I was recently talking to our old sound guy, Gary Bradshaw, that now works for Jeff Lynne, and he's actually about to embark on a tour with Take That. And he said, you might be interested in this. And this is a version of Scissor Man that was recorded in the Birmingham Odeon, I believe, in 1981. And he sent me this thing, and I think it goes for about 7 or 8 minutes. And he sent me this thing, and I listened to it, and I couldn't believe what I was listening to. And I went, WTF, what the hell were we on? Because it was quite remarkable. And I must admit, I've got to send this copy of this version of the song to Andy Partridge, because I don't think he would believe it either. So, it was quite staggering to think that that took place in 1981. And incidentally, we aren't playing that in the set at this point in time.
I don't blame you. I mean, that had to be an exhausting song even back when you were in your 20s. Like I said, I have talked to all the members of XTC over the last couple of years, and we've all talked about different what if scenarios, whether the band could ever get together and record again. I mean, there's always trepidation from all of them that, we're too old to do that kind of thing now. But you're kind of in a unique position, unlike the other guys. You're really the only one that has seen like the modern face-to-face reaction of the fans and how they react to this music. You talk about, bringing, grown men to tears. I'm not surprised by that at all, but it certainly does give you a real unique perspective on where XTC has come in its legacy over the last 40 years.
It's quite scary, really. I think the fact that it has been so long that I think Andy's approach to it is the fact that just leave it where it is and leave people with the memories, really, rather than going out there and perhaps disappointing people. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to be able to play this stuff with two very good individuals that have continued to play live. Both of them are well, one of them is exactly the same age as me, and Steve's only slightly younger, so we're well in our 60s. But those guys have kept their chops and their licks and one thing and another, thereby continuing to play live. And I think from the point of view of Dave and Colin in particular, who haven't done that over, 40 years or whatever it is, I think now, I think to try and turn that around, I think as each day goes by, it would become more and more difficult.
I want to talk about the start of XTC here, because you were in Australia for many, many years, and my understanding is you came back to Swindon for some personal business or whatever it was, and you wind up having conversations with specifically Colin, who wanted to show you or have you listen to some of the songs that he had been working on in a solo project, and that eventually led to this the TC and I Great Aspirations EP, which is terrific. This is a guy who'd been pretty much dormant in making his own music for 17 years. How did this all kind of come about with him wanting to do this and wanting to do TCI with you?
Well, once again, it's one of those things that it was a chance, really. I came over for a wedding. My brother's eldest daughter was getting married, so I came over for that. Colin, at that point in time, was working on putting this. Well, it wasn't even known as Great Aspirations at that point in time. He was just working on some songs. We happened to sort of like bump into each other, I guess. In an arranged sort of meeting there, just to have a few beers and catch up. And he just threw it at me and said, look, do you think you'd be interested in sort of put some drums on this? And it was an opportunity there. I thought, well, what's to lose? There's nothing to lose and everything to gain, in as much that it sounded like it was going to be fun. And I certainly enjoyed doing it. And it really sort of got me back in the saddle.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, Colin also suggested he would like to hear some of the songs that he's written since XTC had not played live. He would like to see them in the live situation. And would you be interested in playing some live shows? Eventually, we put a band together to do that. We did 6 shows, and it took quite a bit of work to get it to that position. But sadly, after 6 shows, Colin didn't really want to get back on the treadmill of going back on the road again. On the other hand, I'd sort of smelt blood in the water, for the want of a better expression. I thought, well, hang on a minute, this is a bit of fun. And I got my hunger back after such a long time.
So when you get the idea to put a band together, specifically to do XTC songs, my understanding is there was a conversation between you and Andy, and he gave his blessing on that. Tell me about that conversation and how did that go?
Well, as I say, once the TC and I live project came to an end, I once again sort of had a beer, I guess, with Andy, as you do. And we were talking about it, and I said, look, we've put a lot of work into this. There's a couple of guys in the band that I think would be interested in sort of continuing on with this. What's your thoughts? Because I asked Dave Gregory if he was involved, and he didn't want to get involved there unless Partridge was involved, and fair enough. But Andy said, "Look, you're already doing very well with this as regards you've got yourself back into shape. You're playing okay. Take it to wherever it goes, because Andy he's happy for anybody to fly the flag." So I said, "Well, what are we going to call this thing now that Colin's not involved?" And he said, "Well, you'll have to call it sort of XTC with an EX and a TC, because that is your initials." And really, he said, "I don't think you could call it anything else if you're going to go ahead and do the XTC material." So it made sense to me, and yeah, that's the way it happened, really. And he said, "Good luck with it."
So we mentioned that the band XTC is also doing some songs that you were not a part of, after 1982. How did you select those specific songs? Are they just songs that were fun to play, or songs that you really enjoyed? What was the determining factor in deciding which specific songs you'd play?
Well, we basically were obliged to sort of do arguably what the hits were, the Senses Working Overtime, Making Plans for Nigel type of thing. I mean, it would be pointless sort of doing a live thing. I mean, people just would expect it. So now that we're only a three-piece band, a lot of the songs that were heavily reliant on keyboards became apparent to us that probably we wouldn't be able to do a decent rendition of. So our hands are tied slightly on what we can do justice to, but fundamentally we're a rock band, and we've sort of worked these things from a skeletal point of view, so that it's the bare bones of it, that you've got the chords, you've got the lyrics, you've got the melody, and hopefully with participation from the audiences, they can be the fourth musician in the band and help us through this thing. But and it's been well received so far, Mike. So yeah, we're happy with the way things are going.
Obviously, Andy is no longer playing live and hasn't in a long time. And I'm not going to ask you to go through, the regurgitation of what happened. I mean, it's very well documented, but it is a pivotal part in the band's history. As a guy that spent 10 years invested in playing this music with those guys, to suddenly have it abruptly change course, and this is amidst, a bad, record contract and poor management all at the same time, that had to be an incredibly frightening and disillusioning time, specifically for you. I mean, you were not one of the songwriters of the band. You were a drummer that loved playing live. This had to be an incredibly difficult moment for you when the band came off.
Yeah, I became disillusioned with the music business, and I just sort of dropped out, really, for the want of a better expression. And the band actually sort of went on strike basically for about 5 years, I think, because they had such a very poor record deal with Virgin Records, and it wasn't until they had their situation sorted out with management that they realised that that we've got to draw a line in the sand as regards moving forward there to make money. I mean, I was sort of out of it by that point. And it was a very difficult time for them. As time goes by, they sort of got back onto it, started re-recording material. And luckily for me, I've got two individuals in the band, Steve Hampton and Terry Lines, are capable of reproducing this stuff. Yeah. So we're actually doing quite a bit of the stuff that I didn't originally record on either. So I mean, hopefully people will come out and they can make up their own mind as to whether we're making a go of it or not.
When I spoke to Andy a couple of years ago, we spoke a lot about a lot of things, obviously, as you do when you're talking to Andy. But we spoke very specifically about you and about your playing. Specifically in the work of drums and wires, and in particular Baxie. Your playing and the way it was recorded completely changed the way drums were used and recorded, for that matter, for the next decade. I mean, obviously a lot of it has to do with Hugh Padgham and Steve Lillywhite and what they did and the techniques they used. But tell me about that, because I mean, I can't even imagine what it's like, as a drummer, to hear what they came up with and to hear that sound. Prior to Baxie, drums just didn't sound like that. I mean, it was such a fat, meaty, powerful sound. What was that like for you to hear what they were coming up with?
Well, it was the first time I'd ever been into a recording studio that wasn't completely muffled down and dampened, and the drums weren't covered with carpet and all sorts of stuff. It just dampened down. It was in a live stone room, and the drums just sounded acoustically as drums should sound, as realistically. And this was quite fortunate for us to have the Steve Lillywhite and Hugh Padgham in this situation, and they embraced the idea and said, "Listen, let's let this thing loose and see where it goes." And it certainly bred a little bit of life into some of the songs. I think that arguably those songs wouldn't have been the same had it not been recorded in such a way. Had it been recorded in the old-fashioned sense of the word, with tea towels over the drums and all this sort of stuff there, and everything deadened down, it wouldn't have had the sort of kick that it did. So it was more of a chance than anything else.
Well, and it influenced so many other great drummers. I mean, when the story I heard is when the Police heard those records, they wanted to know, who did you get to do that? And obviously, you introduced him to Hugh Padgham. That changed the way he sounded. Phil Collins, his entire solo career rested on the same techniques that Hugh Padgham and Steve Lillywhite used for you. I mean, the influence of that sound is completely undeniable. To this day, it doesn't sound dated to me, which I think is really hard to do back in the 80s, where you have an album that sounds like it come out last week.
Yeah, it still astounds me to think that it does. It still sounds good, and even if I say that myself, and I'm usually a little bit more modest than that. But yeah, I don't listen to them frequently, but I'm not embarrassed by them at this point after all this time. And as you say, quite often you listen to stuff there, and it doesn't quite age as well. And this, luckily for us, it seems to still be popular.
It's still popular and still very influential. Like we said, I watched the XTC documentary a couple of years ago, and there's other bands talking about how important XTC was to them, and that influence hasn't just stopped on just those bands. It's gone further and further over decades now. It's a pretty remarkable legacy.
I hear quite frequently about sort of newer artists these days all going back to analog and playing with valve amps and all this type of thing, because the digital thing there seems a little sterile, and I quite often, I can't name any offhand, but I have recently heard that quite a few of the new musicians are actually recording in an old-fashioned way.
When I hear those records and I hear the way they're produced, it is astounding. But the other part that may get lost, and it doesn't. I mean, I've played drums since the age of 12, and very badly, by the way. But I do know what I'm listening to when I'm listening to it. None of those techniques would have made a damn bit of difference if the guy who was playing drums was not playing his ass off. And I think that's when I hear things like Making Plans for Nigel. Most people can't recreate that unless you're the guy who made that up. Respectable Street, Travels in Nylon. All these songs have incredibly complex drum patterns. And so it was never like you were just playing, simple drumming. In many cases, you were doing something that was very, very complicated and really involved.
Yeah, I think that I became musically institutionalized, I guess, by the fact that I was only playing with that band. Those are the only guys I ever played with from a very early age. The age I think we formed when I was about 17, and likewise, I guess with bands like Devo, there was a different approach to the way drums are played, rather than just sort of like four on the floor and just the standard sort of rock rhythms. It was a slightly different approach to make things a little bit more interesting. Otherwise, you would just sort of like be part of the pack. And this was pretty much the way Andy sort of saw things. He was very influenced by guys like David Bowie that keeps, changing the way he sounded, what he was doing before anybody else could catch up with him.
Yeah.
Partridge was very impressed with that. And he felt that in order to stay ahead of the game, things should change. And I probably developed a very bad technique, if musically, as a result of playing this stuff. And if you look at any of the great drummers that are around, and there's plenty of them, they probably sort of like look at this and think they probably overthink it, and it's a lot more simpler than what they imagine.
But when I hear like English Settlement, which I think is some of your best work, and certainly some of your most diverse set of songs, there's just so much going on. Everything from English Roundabout to It's Only Africa. I mean, when I hear those songs, I'm going, this is a guy who definitely knew what the hell he was talking about. Even if you feel like you're maybe feeling your way through it, those patterns took time and care to figure out.
Yeah, the thing with working with Andy Partridge is each of those songs are so drastically different,
right?
And so you couldn't sort of like nail down, oh, these are the drums, this will be it. You had to work at making the drums have some connection with what that particular song was all about. So if it was Nearly Africa, well, naturally we went to an African type of thing. And with the Roundabout, with it being a very repetitive thing when you're going round and round in circles, we tried to apply something that would indicate that that's what was happening. So we tried to associate to a certain degree drum patterns and one thing another that would not sound out of place, but would be interesting and connecting in some way or other, lyrically and musically.
Yeah, and I think that's what separates good drummers from great drummers. I mean, to play to the song, to know what to play the song, to not overplay to the song. To me, that makes a big difference between the good drummers and the great drummers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it was always a thought. Any of these songs, they all needed a little bit of air. Otherwise, you keep layering things down. And I think if there is a criticism of XTC, I think once they stopped playing live, to me, they got a little bit overindulgent at times in the recording studio, and they were throwing everything at it. And I think really a good song is a good song, even if it's played on an acoustic guitar. I think you can sort of it's like this. If you've got an apple pie and you put custard on it and you put ice cream on it and you put maple syrup on it and God knows what else, at the end of the day, you can't taste the apple pie. Right. And that's my way of interpreting the music side of things. Once you put so much on, suddenly you sort of like lose what the hell the thing's about. But I'm not a songwriter, so that's just my way of looking at it.
So you had been playing with Andy and Colin for many, many years. I think it goes back to 1971, 72. It goes back a good long time.
Yeah.
And you have Barry and you have Dave Gregory involved. At what point in this do you begin to realize that this is a really gifted, special band? I mean, was there a specific moment where you said, I'm involved in something really amazing here? I mean, was it the songwriting? Was it the playing? Was the creativity involved? What would you say that moment was for you?
Well, I think it was when Making Plans for Nigel became a reasonable hit in the UK, because up until that point, I think we were just sort of feeling our way, and ultimately it was the third album that we did the drums and wires thing, and really it was we were up against it from Virgin Records. It was like we were overdue as far as they were concerned to have a hit single, and basically the third album, Drums and Wires, it was going to be third strike and you're out. You know, despite the fact that we had a 6-album deal, it was like, well, if we haven't got a hit single off of this thing, you know, basically, I think they were going to cut ties with us. So that was the point. As I say, we were fortunate enough to record that stuff in the Stone Room with Lily White and Hugh Padgham, and fortunately, it sort of saved the day, really.
Like you said before, when you were in Australia, you had been kind of out of music for a good long time. When you come back to Swindon, how rusty were you at drums when you started to come back to Swindon and start playing with Colin and to start XTC?
Well, I was as rough as guts. I can't explain it any other way. But yeah, I got some drumsticks and I started back to basics, really, you know, just sort of like playing on the lounge and hitting pillows and just trying to get the coordination back. And it took quite a while, but Colin had a little studio at his house, and he had a drum kit there as well, just a small sort of piece there. And I was able to sort of go there and start putting a few things together in order to sort of make this CD work. And we managed to salvage something from that. And I just sort of kept working at it. And it took a fair while. But I mean, playing drums is a little like riding a bike. You never really forget. Totally. It's just sort of like that muscle memory needs to come back. And whether at my age or the age of in your 60s anyway, whether you're physically capable of doing the thing. So, yeah, you've got to get yourself back into some sort of shape. And ultimately, it's got to be what you want to do. You know, you have to have the ambition and think, well, is this what I really want to do? But it takes a lot of work.
Yeah. You know, I mean, obviously, a lot of people, you know, talk about Andy's songwriting, and you know, we've been talking about your drumming. Yeah, but one guy who I think doesn't get the credit for the kind of amazing player he is, I think Colin is maybe one of the most underrated bass players ever. I mean, he really was an outstanding bass player, and some of the parts that he came up with were really very creative and very, very musical. I mean, as a guy who's playing in the rhythm section with Colin for all those years, tell me about how you see him as a bass player.
I guess because we started so young, I just used to take it for granted. I thought, well, that's what bass players do, you know. And I never really realized how good he was. We just seemed to sort of like play fairly well together. I never really sort of realized he is a great bass player. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
And likewise with the other pair. I mean, Dave Gregory is a phenomenal guitar player and keyboard player, and yeah, I was very fortunate to be tangled up with these guys, to be honest.
XTC is going to be on tour in April. You're going to be in Hamden, Connecticut, also Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and Boston. Terry, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. I appreciate you coming back to do this properly. It's really great to have you.
Make sure you come and see us at one of those venues, because
I'm going to try my best.
Absolutely, Mike. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely, Terry. Thank you so much for the time. Have a great tour.
Not at all. Thank you very much.
Terry Chambers and his band XTC are coming to the Space Ballroom in Hamden, Connecticut on April 25th, and to the City Winery in Boston on April 30th. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe, like, share, and let everyone you know about it. You can also follow along on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, and email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again for their sponsorship, Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram at Chicopee, and thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.